Hello, welcome to a brand new edition of the Go Crisis podcast. It's an opportunity to bring you some unique insights into the challenges, the issues that perhaps fall upon every company, should it happen, when a crisis occurs, when a major disaster hits the firm. Whether they like it or not, they're going to have to deal with it. And the Go Crisis podcast is an opportunity to lay bare some of the realities of what comes with a crisis. My name's David Eades, and my co-host is the CEO of Go Crisis, Elmarie Marais. Elmarie, very good to see you.
You too, David. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this with me. I'm very excited. I think it was inevitable that our paths crossed in life because it's almost like our careers have been flanked by crisis. And it's just natural for us to talk about something that we are both very passionate about. So thank you for doing this with me. Let's
Sorry, I was just going to say, always, I don't know why I find this funny, but it makes me think of Elmarie Marais, a woman whose life lies in crisis. That's the, sort of, the reality of your trajectory. But how did you get into this field? Because we'll talk a bit about what that field amounts to, but it's hardly a regular career path for a young woman in the first place, is it?
I always sort of bring dark humor into this very serious topic, and I say that I've fallen into it by accident, really, which is really the truth. I did not, as a child, think that I wanted to be a crisis manager in any shape or form. I didn't even know, like many people today, I didn't even know that there was a career like this. I didn't even know that it existed. So for me, how this unfolded is I worked for the aviation industry. And I then moved to England after I got my degree in business. I also had a marketing and communications aspect to the degree, which was, which I draw on every day is the comms side of it. But I then moved to England, and one of my first jobs here in the UK was with Business Link for London. And they had a project which I at some point started to manage, and it was to do with how London businesses would prepare, respond, and then recover from a disaster. London's biggest risks are natural disaster or a terrorist attack, and after that, Business Link made people redundant. I ended up not being one of them, but my CV was, I sent it out in the ether. And I got contacted by a leading disaster management company. They wanted someone with aviation background, a business marketing degree, and someone with experience is in business continuity and disaster management. And that project sort of tacked that onto my CV. Um, in the job spec, it said at the bottom must be comfortable in dealing with death. And I remember saying to Conrad, my husband, what job on this planet would want a marketing manager comfortable in dealing with death? And he convinced me to go to the interview because he was curious about what that could be. So I went for the interview and I came back and I said to him, this is absolutely my calling. I had no idea this existed, but I definitely want to do this. And I took the job, and the rest is history, really. Yeah.
So it's basically about, I mean, I suppose about smoothing the worst possible path for people and for businesses at the worst possible time. And that, I suppose, is that's where the job satisfaction would come in, I guess. I should say for me as a journalist, I mean, over the course of 30 odd years, I've covered a number of disasters, whether they are, as you said, natural disasters or terrorism incidents or even aviation accidents. And I suppose our job has always been, this is what's happened here and now. This is the awful reality of a situation. But what we never really get under the skin of is how all the pieces are pulled together again. Who's doing that? Who's going to look after all the people affected, whether it's the business side of things or indeed the families, the victims, you name it? We sort of touch the surface and then we move on. And I've always found it fascinating that there are people like you who are going to the nth degree to try and resolve some of these awful situations. And I've never really known how you do it. So that for me is what's going to be fascinating with the podcast, to learn more about the methods you use, the processes, the sheer scale of effort sometimes that would go into resolving all the unresolved issues surrounding something like a plane crash, I guess.
Exactly. There's this incredible army, and when I got into this career, I realized this is an incredible army behind the scenes that take care of the affected people. And I've always had a struggle in how do you run a commercial business when there's been this disaster that's happened, and that's always been a conflict. And then at some point, I realized, if the better you look after the affected people, the better you communicate, the better care you provide to the affected people, the more you will also look after the business. So that's how I got those two to realize my focus is on the affected people, and that then automatically looks after what the business that is going through this. But yes, there's an incredible amount of people with incredible experience, and they're sort of like the hidden heroes. And I count emergency services amongst those, of course, but there is this huge team behind the scenes that makes a difference. And I'm hoping that we will really benefit by having them join our podcast and talk about the job that they do behind the scenes so that people can learn more about this incredible work that people do.
I think you've described yourselves as the sort of the Red Cross for corporates in a way, and just give us an idea where you start and almost where you finish in terms of assisting with a crisis, because you have a first response level, don't you? And yet you can also still be engaged with a particular incident months, if not years, down the track.
I'll give you a bit of an example of where we would be called. For instance, in an aviation disaster, there would be a toll-free number that is published on in the news, and anyone who's concerned about a loved one would want to call and say, I think my loved one was on board this flight." Those calls comes to companies like ours, and a big part of what we do is try to figure out who's on board, who's on the manifest, who is calling, are they the next of kin, do they know the next of kin if they are not, and we try to piece together really who are the affected people, who is there ground fatalities, is it only the aircraft, which we call a isolated event with the aircraft, or is it an open event, closed or open event. So we a lot of what we do is try to initially just figure out. Then there's the other aspect
But
of
just hold it there.
spokesperson.
Hold it there, Elmarie.
Yeah.
Who are we? Who are the people who do even that job? Where do they come from? What's their expertise? How many would you have?
So we've got about 1,500 Go responders, and it grows every day. They
Wow.
generally come from the care industry already, but they could be from people from all walks of life. We call them Go responders, but they get trained by us one to one on the call center. So they could be communication specialists, they could be nurses, they could be police officers. Some are retired from all walks of life, but the people generally gravitating to this are people who have already worked in that kind of space, and they take those calls. Why we are so adamant that it's got to be really mature individuals, not necessarily by age, but you know what I mean, in their
Mm.
careers, and because they are taking phone calls from people in extreme distress, and you have to really navigate what information you have, because you want to reassure them, but you are not in a position to do that. So we gather information initially, and then we will do the callbacks later to then confirm to the families whether their loved one was on board or not. So it's really important that we have the right people on the other side of that phone.
Yeah, I get your point, Elmarie, about a sort of need for a degree of maturity and understanding of a situation, because I cannot imagine picking up the phone to the relative of someone who is missing or lost or worse, and having to talk them through what we do and don't know without having a quiver in my voice. I don't know how you do it to start with. You'd have to have that sense of experience, wouldn't you, to be able to get there?
Yeah. Absolutely, but I would also say the most seasoned responders, and I would say myself included. I get a rush of adrenaline and anxiety when I get the call of there's been a major disaster. So we are human, and I think that's why we do this job. Is we are human, and we have an ability to really feel empathy for people going through this. So I wouldn't say that we are not affected, but it's through training and practicing and exercise that you start to really be confident in how to take these calls. But they are never easy.
No. Do you have to take on a sense of responsibility for the media as well? Because I mean, that is where the frenzy starts, isn't it? Let's be honest about it. We are out there to find out information, and we will go to certain lengths to get it. Are you? Do you see yourselves as one of the sort of first lines of defense in managing that information flow? Is that part of your job?
Yeah, I think you would be the first one to agree with me that you cannot manage the media. But I would say it's so important, especially if you go back to the aviation disaster example. There is real, very clear principles on what to follow during when an organization goes through something difficult like that. And the first would be, of course, to express, your compassion and your regret that this has happened. State the facts of what has happened. Provide as much information as you can. You are coordinating with authorities. There's these key messages that you have to have ready before the incident or accident happen, and things that you have to put in place. And then when they are then activated, there's also key principles that you follow, and we support with that. We support with the readiness of that, getting those messages right and ready before anything happens, and then supporting the spokespeople, and the media inquiries. Anything to do with the messaging that goes out to all stakeholders on all platforms is where we help.
It's just we're still on the sort of the tip of the iceberg in a way in terms of the whole response to an emergency. We're still in the first few hours, it feels like, in terms of our discussion,
Yeah.
and there is obviously so much more that then has to go into re- relationship building, I guess, with families, with businesses, in terms of a long trajectory in dealing with the crisis itself.
Yeah, and the most important thing, I mean, we've spoken about, the inquiries that come in. That's your first opportunity to establish yourself as a point of contact for affected people. And that is why it has to be up and running. I always say as quickly as it takes someone to click like and share, because we now live in a world, where media, everyone's a member of the media. So we need to be able to activate a call center or a way for families to get in touch. And that's one of the key points that you can do that. And then once you've established contact with the families, the best way to really look after them is to give them a lot of choice, to give them as much information as you can. But it's the organization's responsibility to make sure that the families have got the choice. Do they want to travel, to be near the incident or accident site? They may need to connect with authorities, and for us to really facilitate all of that, facilitate the practical support, the mental health support, travel support, anything that the families need, to travel to and from the incident or accident
Mm,
site, or if they choose to stay home, to provide that same amount of care and information, to them if they choose to stay home.
mm.
But that is a big logistical part of a response, is to fly affected people in, meet and greet them, arrange hotel accommodation, coordinate briefings with other responding agencies. All of that. That's quite a big part of what organizations need to do, and they do that often through third parties like ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's you obviously have the process down pat, probably, although I'm sure every
Yeah.
case is a different one. Nonetheless, there are certain processes you'd go through. How do you think your work is viewed today compared to, say, I don't know, when you started out? Let's go back 15, 20 years or so. Is there a different attitude within business towards bringing someone in who knows how to deal with these sorts of things? Because I mean, there has always been a natural inclination, I think, for many businesses to say, we've got to manage this, we'll hold on to this, we need to deal with this. Whereas actually there may be a better route. I mean, have things changed? Have you felt them change over time?
Absolutely. I mean, the aviation industry is another very, very good example. So, if you look about 20 years ago, what happened, and how they responded to major incidents and accidents, it was very different to to how they do that now. And the reason for that is lessons have been learned. Families who have been affected by these incidents have rallied, they have lobbied, and they've gotten legislation. And the countries who have signed up for this legislation and to push this through has really really made a difference in those countries on how incidents are managed. With actually the real overarching difference is how to look after affected people. So in those countries, I would say leap years different to what it was 20 years ago. But then there's other countries who've not necessarily signed up for that yet, or are not as mature in how they respond to incidents or accidents, and the government still drives a lot of how things are done on the ground. So it could really, really be different. And I'll give you a classic example. So many years ago, when you have an incident or an accident, let's say it's a bus accident or an aviation disaster, that one of the first jobs is someone would run to the fuselage and paint over the logo on the tail. That was what was done to protect the brand. And now it is an absolute disaster if you do that.
Mm.
You have to be open. You've got to be transparent. You've got to show that you are in the forefront looking after, on the front line, looking after the victims. And your brand is the last thing that you should be concerned about. You actually use that to show action and concern. So
That's
just
sort of
a classic example of how
Yeah,
different
you,
it
you
is
you
now.
think of it now, and it just sounds absolutely mad, doesn't it? Like a
Bizarre.
cover up sort of 2.0. But
Yeah.
that was a prevailing view at a certain point. I just wonder.
Yeah.
I mean, this year has started. Let's be honest, badly. I would say in terms of some major aviation accidents in particular, but overall one would assume that over the last 20, 30 years, this is a much safer industry, for example. There are probably fewer disasters of that type around at the moment. And I know you have a bit of a concern there, don't you, about what that means in terms of people getting first-hand experience of managing crisis.
Yeah. I'll give you another example. I've just recently met a lady that works for an airline who's had a major accident a few years ago, and she was lovely. She's a she's a PR person in the company. And I started talking about this disaster with her and asked, do you know this person? Do you know this person? Because, the industry is really small and we all know each other. Because aviation, it's a lucky industry. It's lucky in the sense that it is exceptionally safe, and but it's also not ideal, because when there is an aviation disaster, the world pays attention to this.
Mm.
It is world news. I always say, when you respond to something like that, you don't just represent your company, you represent your country, because the world's eyes are on you. But anyway, we spoke about this very famous disaster, and I asked her, do you know these people? And she looked at me a bit strange, because they are absolute legends in the industry because of the work that they've done. And she said to me, I don't know them. And when that accident happened, I was in school, which made me feel really old. But that's the fact. We are in a world now where it's safer. January has not been a good start for aviation, but I still think that it is a place where the world is getting safer. Health and safety is really tight. Safety management systems in the high risk industries like oil and gas, which you work in, maritime aviation, that's all in place. It's getting safer and safer, which means that people with experience on the front line responding to these kinds of things is becoming less and less. And I think we spoke about this before, which is why we think we should do this podcast. These incredible stories that people have, and we should share these lessons. We should share our experiences, because they are becoming a little bit scarce now, which is a good thing. But we need to make sure that we have a legacy and we pass that on to the next generation.
But it's extraordinary, isn't it, that you're talking about the sort of the disappearance of expertise almost because of the success in health and safety terms. There's this
Yeah.
that's a very uncomfortable sort of contradiction, isn't it? Things are getting better, but actually we should worry about the loss of that expertise and people who know what to do when these sorts of disasters arise.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the problem that we have, and is, especially with the big major disasters, is that that expertise is sort of retiring soon, and I'm a while away from retiring, but that's just the fact, that we've got to take care of that knowledge, and we have to sustain it. And the other thing is also, it's that we always say it's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's a matter of when it's going to happen.
Well, prescient words there from Elmarie. It really isn't about if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. And I hope that with the Go Crisis podcast, we can help to direct you in terms of the challenges that come along when these crises hit. And to that end, we're going to introduce you to a series of world-class speakers and experts in the field. And we're starting at the top of the tree, really, because we're going to be having an interview shortly with Dr. Lucy Easthope. Lucy is certainly one of the world authorities on disaster recovery and disaster management. She's also written a book, which you may have read, of course, which is When the Dust Settles, which gives a very candid perspective on the sort of work that she is involved with, a lot of wisdom to boot, and also ideas for how companies can best manage the challenges as and when they come along. So keep your eyes and ears open for Dr. Lucy Easthope here at the Go Crisis podcast. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you soon.